Laurence Ball is a professor of economics at Johns Hopkins University and an associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research. He's been a visiting scholar at a number of central banks, including the Federal Reserve, the Bank of Japan, the Bank of England, and the Reserve Bank of New Zealand. He has a book out entitled The Fed and Lehman Brothers, Setting the Record Straight on a Financial Disaster. Laurence, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So, the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers, now about to go on its 10th year anniversary.
Yes.
Could that have been avoided? Should they have bailed out Lehman Brothers? Give us your thoughts on that. And essentially, a little bit of a Cliff Notes version of what you have here in your book.
Yes, it could have been avoided, and yes, they should have bailed out Lehman. Although I don't really like the word bailout, it's a little pejorative. I would say they should have given a temporary emergency loan to keep Lehman going to try to work out its problems. But the basic point of the book is that Federal Reserve officials, ever since the bankruptcy, have said their hands were tied because they didn't have the legal authority to rescue Lehman because Lehman did not have enough collateral for the loan it needed, which is a requirement under the law. And rather long story short, what my book establishes is that that's simply not true, that Lehman did have enough collateral for the loan that it needed to keep operating. So the Fed could have kept Lehman in business at least for a while, and that would have prevented a lot of the chaos associated with its failure. And probably the whole financial crisis and Great Recession would not have been as bad.
Well, of course, the old saying, hindsight is 20/20, so I'm going to put you on the spot now, Laurence. To be honest with our viewers appreciate honesty. Pulling the clock back 10 years, at that point, were you still a fan at that point of bailing out Lehman Brothers? Or have you come across with hindsight after the fact saying, we really should have done this?
Well, I am certainly using hindsight. I think if I had been, say, chair of the Fed or a top policymaker at the time, I probably would have been frozen with panic and done worse than what actually happened. So I'm not going to fault the Fed for not getting everything right at 2 a.m. in the middle of a crisis. What I do find fault with is that they've had 10 years to give an accurate account of what happened, and they haven't done that.
Yeah, they certainly haven't. When you come back, I want to talk to you a little bit. We need to take a commercial break. When we come back, I want to talk to you a little bit about what we've done now to prevent that from happening in the future, and maybe a little bit about also what investors could do to help prevent that in the future, to help protect themselves, because it's certainly an issue. And I appreciate your honesty. I know our viewers respect that when you say hindsight's part of that decision. So Laurence, stay with us. We'll be right back. And you stay with us too. We'll talk to Laurence Ball more about these types of financial failures and what we can do to protect ourselves moving forward. We'll be right back on The Income Generation. And we're back with Laurence Ball, author of the book, The Fed and Lehman Brothers, Setting the Record Straight on Financial Disaster. So, Laurence, as you know, our audience are members of the income generation, those over the age of 50 who, really can't afford to make mistakes with their money at this stage of their lives. The same generation in which you and I are, right? So do they have to worry about this in the future, or do you think the Fed is taking steps to prevent this type of disaster or domino effect from occurring moving forward?
I think people do have to worry about it in the future. I think we can hope that the Fed takes the lessons of the last episode to heart. And I think a key lesson being that they should be ready to prevent catastrophic failures of financial institutions with emergency loans. The problem there is that legislation since the crisis has put restrictions on the Fed's lending ability. That was part of the Dodd-Frank Act. So there's some question about how effectively the Fed will be able to deal with these crises in the future. I mean, as far as what people can do about it, I don't really have much to say other than hold a diversified portfolio and hope for the best.
Well, how about this? For example, there are the list of the financially systemic companies that are too big to fail and those that are not. So maybe by sticking with the companies on those lists, maybe That might help a little bit.
I don't know. I think in the worst case in which the systemically important companies go down, they'll probably drag the rest of the economy with them. I don't think there's really, something, if there's another crisis and it's mishandled, that will badly damage the US economy. And there's probably no way to protect oneself other than not investing in the US. But of course, other economies also may have crises. So unless there's a safe investment in Mars, I'm afraid I don't have any great advice.
So in the 45 seconds or so we have left, do you agree with our last guest who is worried about having pushed people up the risk curve with what the Federal Reserve has done in creating a stock market bubble, but also having created a kind of a worldwide debt bubble? Are those concerns of yours also?
Well, briefly, I would say not really, in the sense that the Fed's policy has been necessary to help the economy recover from the Great Recession. And a healthy economy is the number one thing for not only employment, but also returns on savings.
Okay. All right. So in 15 seconds or less, tell us, what is it you want people to get from reading your book?
To get the idea that you can't take at face value everything the government officials say. That's not a new insight, but it was driven home to me that we have to be very critical of the official account of the crisis.
Yeah, those are great words of wisdom. Laurence, thanks so much for being on our show today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
And stay with us. We'll be right back to wrap up this week's episode of The Income Generation. Stay with us.